This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work, responding to another Ask Prof. Wolff question from our Patreon community. And this one comes from Ken Miller. He asks whether or not I could elaborate the reasons why I separate the issue of the COVID-19 pandemic from the issue of the economic crash. We are living through the combination of those, which is clearly worse than either of them alone. But I want to stress that they are separate and that neither is the cause of the other. Each contributes to making the other worse than it might otherwise have been, but that's different from confusing them or imagining that they are causes of one another in some significant way. What's the evidence for this, and why do I stress it? First, there is an agency here in the United States that keeps track of economic ups and downs, business cycles. It's called the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER. Anything you want to know about cycles, when they start, how long they last, how bad their impact, when they stop, when the upturn begins, and any other questions you have are best referred to the NBER. You can go and find them on the internet. They have more information about the business cycle than you probably want. They say that the current economic crash, or if you like, recession, or if you like, depression, we have many words for these things, began in February. And every report I know of says that the pandemic, the virus, hit this country in March. So clearly, one happened before the other. I don't think anyone has suggested that the crash caused the virus. That would be a bizarre stretch, and I'm not aware of any significant argument to that effect. I have, however, seen a mountain of arguments to the effect that the crash was caused by the pandemic. Indeed, it is often referred to as the corona or COVID crash, the economic downturn being somehow associated as a necessary consequence or part of the pandemic. And for me, that's equally nonsense. And it's not just that they didn't happen in the way that the story suggests you ought to believe. No. There's plenty of other evidence. By far the most important is the following. Capitalism as a system, and by capitalism I mean the arrangement for producing goods and services such that a small minority, employers, have all the power, all the decision-making apparatus in their hands to determine what an enterprise produces, how it produces it, where it produces it, and what is done with any profits generated by an enterprise. The vast majority of people involved in an enterprise are employees, and they are systematically, legally, ideologically excluded from the decisions made by a tiny minority, the owner, the board of directors elected by the major shareholders, the family that owns. These are tiny minorities of people within the larger community of any enterprise. And yet they are charged with all of the determinant power, and consequently, they are the ones who become wealthy, whereas the employees, no matter how successful the company, much less so, if at all. You all know this. This system, this capitalist system organized this way, experiences something that came to be called the business cycle. It came to be called that over the last 300 years because wherever capitalism has settled in as the economic system, North, south, east, and west, Western Hemisphere, Eastern Hemisphere, you name it, it has had a crash, a downturn, a bust, a recession, a depression. You get the picture. Every 4 to 7 years, on average. It's an average. So sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it's not that long before the next one comes. And what are these crashes? They're always more or less the same. Suddenly, significant numbers of people are thrown out of work, lose their jobs, through no fault of their own. Their work is no less productive or important today than it was yesterday. Yesterday they were working, today they were laid off. Ditto, companies that produce as well as they often did or always did are suddenly without customers, are suddenly unable to function, are suddenly unable to get loans, are suddenly unable to sell. And of course, if workers are out of work and businesses are reduced or cut out of existence, the flow of tax revenue to cities, states, and countries goes down, inhibiting their ability to provide public services just when the public, because of unemployment, because of the crash, needs them the most. Not an efficient system, not even a well-organized system. That's capitalism. Well, let's take a look at the first 20 years of this century. We had a crisis in the spring of 2000. We had a crisis again in the autumn of 2008. And here we have the third crisis of these 20 years in the year 2020. 20 years, 3 crises, / downturn / recessions, works out to a little less than 7 years just on schedule. So to think that we have a crash because we have a once-in-a-century terrible pandemic is without merit. It's an empirically absurd argument. We had the last terrible virus in this country in 1918, literally a century ago. And we have one now. Between those, we had many, many crashes. Viruses don't cause crashes. Crashes don't cause viruses. It is capitalism's nightmare to have them both together. But it was already a very bad recurring dream to have these crises. Don't be fooled. Calling them by the name of something that happened nearby, the COVID crisis now, the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008, or the dot-com crisis in 2000. That's a none too clever way to try to say the crisis is somehow the fault of those specific events. It isn't. It wasn't. That's why we've had it for 300 years. And every effort of capitalism to rid itself of this horrible instability has failed. And that's why we're going through such a terrible one yet again right now. This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work.